Before we get into this particular part, I want to go over a bit of a backstory for some of you guys who aren't into the whole medium of collecting and all those shenanigans that I'm into. So, a bit of a backstory. In the early 1980s, Walt Disney Productions, as they were called, was not doing too well. A lot of their movies were not doing well at the box office. Their television networks and shows were just repeats of endless things. Their home video releases weren't doing too well. And even their theme parks, some of the most popular places in the world to go to today, weren't really drawing a lot of success and were costing millions to maintain. So because of this, Disney was not in a particularly good place in the early 1980s. The only real success that Disney had in this era was in re-releasing their old animated films that were made during Walt's time and a little bit afterwards. So films like Pinocchio and Snow White and Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and all that, they were the only way the company was making money. And since there wasn't a cost to re-release them, all they really had to do was just put them out in theaters and presto, they'd make some money. Not a lot, but hey, it's all that they could manage to do. This ultimately put a fear in the heads of Walt Disney Productions because they were afraid that if they were to release, say, Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella or any of the other ones on home video, that it would really damage their long-time viability at the box office. Disney really didn't have a lot of faith in themselves at this point and knew that the only way to really maintain a sense of normalcy and just a general sense of success even, they really had to keep these films under lock and key. And as a result, 15 Disney animated films in their canon were deemed the untouchables. These films were to never be released on home video at any given time. The 15 untouchables included Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Pinocchio, Fantasia, Bambi, Cinderella, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, The Sword and the Stone, The Jungle Book, The Aristocats, Robin Hood, The Rescuers, and The Fox and the Hound. Now, the reason why Dumbo and Alice in Wonderland weren't included in that was because the two of them had already been released in the Disneyland television series. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the very second episode of Disneyland's television series was an edited version of Dumbo, which would only receive a few re-releases in its lifetime to theaters. Alice in Wonderland, if I'm not mistaken, only received one. But the other 15 were never supposed to see the light of day on home video or to be played on television in their entirety. I know in the anthology series, they'd show little segments from Cinderella or Peter Pan or Pinocchio or something like that, but they were never supposed to be shown on home video. Now, this attitude began to change in Disney as new people were starting to be ushered into the company. As more and more of Disney began to collapse and fall apart, Roy Disney, Walt Disney's nephew, decided he was going to essentially save the company by ousting his by ousting his in-law Ron Miller, who was currently the president of the Disney company, and replacing him with people he believed could help run the company and advance it into the next age of its success. These men ultimately ended up being Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Peter Schneider, among others. And these four were all about making money immediately and long term. Disney sort of had that edge of it being, let's just focus on getting whatever we can get whenever we can get it. But with Eisner and Wells and all them, they wanted to bring out as much success and financial appeal as humanly possible. So the talks began even as Ron Miller was still in the business of running the studio, that the Disney films, specifically The Untouchables, would start to be released on video. Now, they didn't want to start off with Snow White, mostly because they were afraid that Snow White was their biggest moneymaker. They really could not afford to really risk putting that out there immediately. But there was also more. They couldn't really risk putting out any of the really big titles because, I mean, maybe they had a point that some of these films were making a lot of money for the company, and giving up their success in theaters could really damage the company long term. But fortunately, the incoming team had better sense than just to capitalize and release them all immediately. They followed the same repertoire that Disney had been doing for years when it came to their re-releases. They would release one or two films a year on home video, and then return them back into the Disney vault for 7 to 10 years. Sometimes shorter, sometimes a bit longer, depending on when they wanted to celebrate re-releases or anniversaries or what have you. But Walt Disney Classics was going to start, and it needed a film that sort of could be the test dummy for it. Dumbo, Alice in Wonderland, and The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh had all already been released on home video as part of just Walt Disney Home Video's generic collection. So they were released alongside Mary Poppins and Bedknobs and Broomsticks and all the other Disney films. But they needed an untouchable that they could really send out as a bit of a flyer. And we'll be talking about that one in the next part. So stay classy, YouTube.